We conquered the land, we conquered the seas, we conquered the sky, but who may conquer beyond our earthly nest, our cradle of life, our motherly home? The answer for this question was sought by those of the 1900s, an era of major dilemma between two established powers, the Soviet Union and the United States of America. An exhilarating space rivalry commenced with the Soviet Union's launch of Sputnik in 1957, sparking the interests of many new ideas and ways to implement them into the field of space. However, in the midst of the outer space frenzy going on came the need for a compromise, one that would allow international relations to function smoothly in regards to outer space. The answer? The Outer Space Treaty. The issue here was who could own the extraterrestrial bodies, the first ones who got there, or whoever had the most money. Leaders of the world knew that it was imperative that they come to an agreement. People's opinions grew stronger, and combined with the innate hate for the enemy of the state, much potential energy was being built up in the small debate about space ownership.
I started working that was the time that the United Nations just started looking at the space matters, because this was shortly after the Sputnik years, and the President Eisenhower from the United States had proposed at the General Assembly of the UN that there should be an international organization, specialized agency under the UN dealing with space. But the Russians at the time, after Sputnik, did not like the idea, and they objected to it. This is the Cold War time, and then the compromise in the end was that there will be a committee in the United Nations.
The United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, UNOOSA, was upstarted in 1958, and with accurate timing in 1967, President Eisenhower, the committee, and the United States were able to come up with a diplomatic solution, the Outer Space Treaty. Similar in purpose and structure to the Antarctica Treaty, the OST served to bring together governments around the world regardless of views and establish that outer space was not a claimable ground. Opened for signature on January 27, 1967, the OST was a multilateral agreement comprised of 17 articles, which essentially dictate the basis of outer space law even till today. Articles 1 and 2 focused on equality and prohibiting ownership of celestial bodies. Article 3 required activities to be legal based upon common laws and laws established previously by the UN. Articles 4 through 9 regarded peaceful and friendly use of space, along with taking responsibility for damage and other mishaps. Articles 10 through 12 discussed mutual agreement, right to knowledge of discoveries, and cooperative progression. All of the articles made the treaty historically significant because of the values they effectively promoted and the precautions they enacted. The rest of the articles dictated more subjective matters based on the OST itself. 64 countries signed the treaty on the first day, agreeing to the provisions of diplomacy. Specifically significant articles include Article 1 because it essentially promoted everyone to be enthusiastic into space exploration. Article 2 is also important because it outright stated that no country nor individual could claim any celestial body. Article 4 made the treaty extremely efficient because it eradicated any idea of weaponizing space for warfare, which could have been otherwise devastating. Article 13 covered up any loopholes, saying that the treaty was to be in effect under any circumstance. The Outer Space Treaty stated a number of things, such as there shall be freedom of scientific investigation in outer space, and states shall facilitate and encourage international cooperation in such investigation. It firmly laid down the law and acted as a diplomatic gesture to the countries around the world by stressing the importance of cooperation and progress. The OST entered into force on October 10, 1967, and later 98 countries, including Russia and America, were finally. The Outer Space Treaty opened many new doors, some into the space industry. Now an entirely new realm of possibilities could be explored because of the willing nature of countries to cooperate. Collaborative projects and achievements slowly began to emerge with the signing of the treaty. Cosmonauts and astronauts could now work together without having politics interfere. Their safety was now in the international hands of the UN. Relations between countries also were reconciled, as the USA and USSR were just coming out of the Cold War.
Well, I think we talked about the Russian space vehicle Cosmos 954 and its re-entry over Canada, because it was a nuclear-powered satellite that had an onboard propulsion system intended to raise it to a higher orbit at the end of its useful orbital life. The onboard propulsion system failed, and as a result, the satellite re-entered the atmosphere and broke up and spread its nuclear materials across the tundra of Canada, south of Hudson's Bay, and it left an enormous footprint, about some people say 300 miles long, some people say 500 miles long, and about 50 to 100 miles wide. There was just a swath across Canada of nuclear materials spread out in the snow. The government of Canada agreed to let the United States go in and help them clean that up. We had a lot of Geiger counters mounted in airplanes, and we were able to find a lot of the material and pick up the pieces and put them back together. Canada did not ask Russia for help. At the end of the cleanup, Canada sent a bill to Russia, but they would not pay any of the US cost because that was just officious intermeddling. And the Russians said, you never asked us to help you, and we would have been happy to help you. So the claim for retribution was brought under the Liability Convention. And I think that particular case is the single most relevant one that has come forth under the Space Treaty so far.
Thanks to the diplomatic ways of the OST, in the case of Cosmos 954, the procedure of cleanup and payment was peaceful and regulated. The short-term effects of the OST were a big deal for the time period. First off, there is an immediate recognition of outer space as free for use and exploration by all, that weaponization of space was eliminated, and that nobody could own it, individuals nor states. In essence, it was definite that space would not be a war zone, but rather a friendly, cooperative region of knowledge. This created a calmer union between countries, as by now nations had been informed of how space governing would proceed.
The two areas that are most important today are the prohibition on claims of national sovereignty, which all leads into these issues about ownership in space and whether or not people can own land on the moon and develop it. Those whole issues have to deal with national sovereignty as well as the role of governments in supervising non-governmental entities. And then, of course, the other very important aspect of it is military uses of space.
Long-term consequences included an extension of the short-term ones, meaning that the primary impacts have been prominent through time to the present day. For example, the International Space Station was born as a result of international harmony. Other effects are that there is a more strong-held cooperation between governments in outer space relations, and now more countries have been encouraged, like India, to partake in space programs. Though some may critique the treaty of its ambiguity, no failures are apparent for the OST. The OST was a remarkable document of diplomacy, one that sought to change the world and unify prominent nations for our journeys beyond planet Earth. Without it, we could never go beyond the cradle in peace, and certainly never come to an agreement here on Earth. It firmly set the rules and stressed that cooperation was key, and it appeased the emerging question of who should own space. The Outer Space Treaty, the document that set forth the future for the human race and created the basis for our advancement into the next stage of life. It was truly a diplomatic catalyst for cooperation and harmony in outer space, and it ushered us into a new era, one that would arise above the atmosphere and all.